It's really good to have Billy McCurrie with us. Thank you, Billy, for joining us. And I know this is a familiar story for you, but for many of us, we find it deeply, deeply moving. And if I may, I just want to really explore a little bit about your upbringing, your background. We know eventually you became a terrorist, but I don't imagine that's what you dreamt of becoming when you were a child. So tell us about your background.
Yes, Roger, I hail from Belfast, a working class area, the lower part of the Newtonards Road. Grew up with in a very loving home. My mum and dad, an older brother, older sister, myself and then a younger sister. And growing up in the 60s with all that sort of cultural revolution and the sort of pop music with the Beatles and the Monkees and the Rolling Stones, and two older teenage kids in the house. There was all that mix in that home. And of course my mum, fond memories of her going about the house singing country songs, and I've got a love for country music today, and I think it comes from my mum as she went about the house cleaning. And as I say, Roger, it was a very loving home. What captivated my imagination in the 60s certainly wasn't terrorism or anything that was unfolding on the streets of Belfast or Londonderry. It was the Apollo space program, when Kennedy says we're going to put a man on the moon. As a young boy, that really gripped my imagination, Roger. And that was what, was fulfilling my dreams as a little boy.
Yes.
Could I ever be an astronaut?
Were you a church-going family?
No, nominally Christian, I guess. My mum would have been the one who encouraged a church attendance at Christmas and Easter. Like most kids in the area where I grew up, we were sent to Sunday school on Sundays, but I think that was just to give the parents a bit of peace more than anything. You need to get your soul sorted out. And also the Thursday evenings, there wasn't much to do in the area, so there was a little children's meeting on Thursday evenings, and we would all go to that just to get in, particularly in the winter, to get in out of the cold. So that was about as much sort of contact that I had with anything Christian.
Now, it was as a young lad, really, that everything was to change for you, Billy. And I always feel a little guilty if ever I ask you about this, but if you could just go over what happened on that Saturday.
Yeah, Roger, it's a day that I live with every day, even after 50 years. And like a number of events in my life, that day is as fresh today as it was. Back in June 1970, 27th of June was a beautiful, beautiful day. I remember my mum came up and she woke me up and she said to me, did I want to go a walk with my dad? My dad was going to go a walk that morning, and would I like to join him? And I got up, got dressed, had my breakfast, and me and my dad headed out on a walk that lovely morning. Now, I'm not sure what time we left the house. It must have been about 9 or shortly after. But we spent the whole morning and the early part of that Saturday afternoon together. Hold so many precious memories, Roger.
I'm sure. But in the evening, something happened.
Yeah, that's right. I think because it was such a lovely day, we used to go to Bangor in County Down, and those Saturdays get the train and go down to Bangor. I think my dad wanted to go to Bangor that day. And because it was coming up to the 12th of July, me and my sister and 2 other kids in the street wanted to paint the paving stones red, white, and blue. Now, if you're ever over in the province, you'll know the significance of this.
Mm.
And because of that, I think my mum said, look, let the kids just paint the street. And we went round the neighbours' houses, collecting money for the tins of paint. And over we went to the paint shop and bought, tins of red, white, and blue, and painted started painting the house, mid-afternoon, having come back with my dad. And I often wonder, Roger, if we had went to Bangor that day and spent the best part of the day in Bangor, perhaps my dad wouldn't have went out to the club that evening. So many ifs and buts, yeah. Roger, but in the providence of God, my dad went out that evening to see his friends. And at the end of the evening, they were going to come back to our house for something to drink, or you get sort of soup and sandwiches or whatever. And my dad said to his friends, I'll run on ahead, and asked my wife to get the teapot on. And as he turned the corner, it was about 11:30 that night, as he turned the corner off the street, IRA gunmen opened up and he was shot dead. I heard that blast of automatic gunfire. I was playing out in the street waiting on my dad coming home. My mum was talking to the other neighbours, because it was such a warm night. The women were standing outside just chatting, waiting on their husbands coming home. And with the blast of automatic gunfire, and then that continued, for the next several hours. It didn't abate. I was pulled into a neighbour's house, got separated from my mum, and the shooting's continuing, and I'm sitting on the seat with my eyes closed, Roger. And people were coming and going. And over the gunfire, as people were coming and going, I heard hushed whispers. Does he know? Has anybody told him? It's awful. It's terrible. And I got up off the seat and said, what haven't you told me? What don't I know? And I run out of the house, and the hands were trying to grab me. And as I was running up the street, I can still see the tracer bullets from the gunfire. And I'm running up the street, and I would have been running what would have been into the line of the gunfire. And my friend's dad, he stepped out and grabbed me, and I must have been crying, Roger, and saying, where's my daddy? Where's my daddy? And he said to me, Billy, your daddy's not coming home. He said, your daddy's dead. And I remember saying to him, perhaps that's God's will, or perhaps this is God's will. And he grabbed me by the shoulders. I was 12 years old. He grabbed me by the shoulders, and he nearly shook the life out of me. And he said, there is no God. And he used an expletive, and he said, it's those, people across the road, referring to the Roman Catholic community. He says, it's them. It's nothing to do with God. And he says, never you forget that. And go ahead.
Well, Billy, could I ask, was your father targeted, or was he, as they say, in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Wrong place at the wrong time, Roger. He was just coming.
He wasn't involved in the troubles. He wasn't a paramilitary himself or anything.
No, he was a unionist, but he wasn't in the Orange Order or anything. Other members of his family, I had uncles, his brothers-in-law, they were all in the Orange Order, well up in the Orange Order. But my dad had no time for it, really, so he hadn't.
And what happened to you then? What stirred up bitterness and hatred and a desire for revenge?
Roger, see the impact that had on the family. You know, I've often said to you, you know, I know that my family don't have a monopoly on violence. Many families have been touched by the madness that emanated from the province during the course of those 30 years. And not everybody reacted the way I reacted or my family reacted, but I can tell you, we reacted with hate and bitterness. Now, that this was a loving family before this, Roger, a really happy home. And all of a sudden it's plunged into sorrow and grief and heartache. And yeah, that hatred grows.
And how were you, I don't know, how did you make contact, or they contact you so that you became involved with a paramilitary group?
I contacted them.
Did you?
And not only did I contact them, but I remember asking my mum, you know, how could I join the terrorist group? And she made inquiries for me too. And my older brother, he was already involved in a terrorist group. You know, it affected the whole family, Roger. And I went out of my way to join the junior wing of the Ulster Volunteer Force at the age of 16.
And you were taught how to use weapons?
Yeah, well, I wanted to kill as many people as possible, and I reasoned that you can kill more people with a bomb than you can with a gun. So I went into the classes on making bombs, you know, and it was only by God's grace that I didn't kill as many people as I had wanted to kill. But yeah, I went into that organization not to sit on my hands. I went in to kill people, and that at the age of 16.
Was your mother aware of it? Was your mother aware that you joined?
She was
which group, Billy?
She was aware that I was involved in the organization, but she didn't know how deeply I was involved. I think at the age of 16, she thought that you know, the most I would be doing would probably be transferring weapons or keeping an eye out, you know, on the street corners for police coming, while other people actually did the more serious stuff. So my mum, yeah, while she knew that I was involved and supportive of my involvement, she didn't know the level.
No. Which group was it?
I joined the junior wing of the Ulster Volunteer Force, and then transferred into the Ulster Volunteer Force because I believed that would give me more opportunity to operate.
Now, eventually, you were sent on a mission to kill, weren't you?
Yeah.
What happened?
I was asked, again, nobody twisted my arm up my back. I volunteered to do this. Initially, I was told that this was a member of the IRA, but then it transpired before the actual shooting that he was a member of my own organization. I was told that he was an informer. Well, the rules are, if you're an informer, you know, it's an immediate death sentence. So as far as I was concerned, if the guy was informing, he knows the rules. And I certainly didn't want to back out, because I thought if I had backed out, they would have said, you know, he's all talk. So anyway, yeah, the 19th of February, 1976, another one of those days, Roger, that's indelibly printed on my mind. You know, as I'm talking to you now, Roger, I've often said, you know, I can see that incident as clear as you are in the screen.
So you went face to face with the man you were about to kill.
Yeah, there was myself and a colleague, and he had the details of the car and the place where he would be pulling up for work. So yeah, we went and waited on him. The shooting took place in a derelict street. Nobody, humanly speaking, nobody saw us carry out that shooting. It was cold, it was callous, it was merciless, it was bloody and brutal. Um, and such was life in Belfast in 1976.
Mm. Can you still picture him?
Oh yeah, can see his face. I can see, you can almost read the thoughts going through his mind. You know,
Amazing.
to be that close to somebody and see what they're thinking in their eyes, Roger, and they don't know what's coming.
And Billy, it wasn't long before, as it were, the long arm of the law caught up with you. How much longer? How much after?
2 weeks.
2 weeks
later.
So because you were under the age of 18, you didn't go to prison then. You went to a youthful remand centre, did you?
Well, it was different in the province. Yes, I did go to prison. I went to the Maze prison.
Even as a 17-year-old?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay.
Because it was underage, it couldn't be given a life sentence.
Okay.
Right? But the Maze was opened in 1972 initially as an internment sort of camp. But as internment was phased out and the troubles escalated, it became a place that held people that were arrested for terrorist-related crimes. So I was placed in a part of the prison that held members of the UVF, and it was run along military lines. Now there was no sense of shame or regret, Roger, or remorse. At that time, there was an element of pride.
Really? If I'd met you and said, did you believe in God? You know, you're working for a so-called Protestant organization. It was really, as you said, a unionist group. But if I said, did you believe in God? What would you have said?
No. Yeah, the motto of the organization was for God and Ulster. And like, God didn't feature at all in any of our thinking. You know, we were a godless group, and you know, God did not feature in our thinking or rationale at all. And certainly, as I was thinking it through, Roger, at that age, particularly over the years after my dad had been shot, you know, if there was a God, he could have stopped that. You know, if there was an all-powerful God, he could have stopped all the pain that we were feeling as a family and all the hurt.
Now, because you were under the age of 18, what sort of sentence were you given?
I was detained under the Secretary of State's pleasure. Now, Roger, that's exactly the same as the life sentence. It just takes longer to say.
Yes, okay. And for you, was life grim, or how did you cope?
When I went into the compound part of the Maze, life wasn't grim. As I say, the paramilitaries ran the place, so it was pretty relaxed. When I was sentenced and transferred to the H blocks, I was sentenced on the 12th of May 1977. Now the H blocks were an entirely different ball game. People who are familiar with the history of the province would know that emanating from the H blocks, you have the Republican protests, you know, blanket protests, dirty protests with smeared excrement on the walls, and the hunger strike. So all of that is in the H blocks of the Maze prison, and that's where life tended to get a bit more difficult.
But I know you've told me in the past, Billy, they even had bomb making lessons in prison.
Yeah, that's right, Roger. Now that's when I was in remand on the compound side where the UVF had controlled. Yes, we had. Now they didn't have the actual explosive material, but they used substitute material. Yeah, and those lessons took place inside. Isn't that bunkers like?
Amazing. But it was while you were in prison, after a few years, Billy, that you began, well, things happened, didn't they, that began to stir up your thinking about the Lord?
Yeah, that's right. One of the first people that I met who was professing faith was a fella called Peter Thompson. He was sentenced shortly after me. I knew Peter from our remand time together, and I knew that when I knew Peter on remand, he wasn't a Christian, but between getting sentenced and also coming to the H blocks, suddenly Peter's carrying a Bible, which I thought was really convenient because he'd just been given a life sentence and he wants to get out of prison early. So what's the best way of getting out of prison early? Well, you're going to have to show the authorities that you're a good guy now. And what better way to show the authorities you're a good guy than carry a Bible and say you've got a bit of religion? But as far as I was concerned, Peter was a hypocrite. Okay, he was a phony. And Peter, when he came to the H blocks, decided that he was going to be the barber. Okay, so if anybody needed a haircut, you had to send for Peter. Now, Roger, he had never cut anybody's hair in his life, right? But he knew that being the block barber, he could get to the four wings of the H block, okay, to cut people's hair. And when he started to cut the hair, the only thing he started talking about was Jesus, you know. I mean, see if by this time, if you're becoming a good atheist, the last thing you need is somebody talking to you about Jesus, you know, for half an hour while he's cutting your hair and making a mess of it. And yet, Roger, I often smile at his now, you know, as I look back at his method of evangelism, you know, because he did place the scissors on the side of the neck and apply a fair degree of pressure. And he would say, now, see if I push a little more, this is into your jugular. And you're lying there in a pool of blood, and see by the time they get a medic down, you're dead, and you don't believe in Jesus Christ, and you'll be in hell. You know, what about that for evangelism?
Not something we recommend. No.
No. But that was Peter.
Nevertheless.
Yeah. That was Peter's approach.
But he began to speak to you.
Yeah, well, every chance Peter got, he would try to speak about Jesus Christ. And if you have no interest in the Bible, you're just blanking him. And see, around about 1978, Roger, I started to receive magazines from New Zealand. Now, to this day, I do not know anybody in New Zealand, but these magazines started to arrive at the cell. And I remember pulling one of them out of the contents. In fact, it was an envelope. It would have been, I don't know if you see this is open a bit, but it was an envelope about this size. So it was a brown envelope. And I pulled the contents out halfway and caught the name of Jesus. No time for religion. It goes back inside the envelope, curl it up in the ball and throw it in a waste paper bin. And about 6 or 8 weeks later, another one of these familiar looking envelopes with the postmark New Zealand and a New Zealand stamp, handwritten to myself and to Bayes Prison. I know what's inside it, and it goes into the bin. And if these magazines keep coming and Peter's still been around the place with his novel approach to evangelism, I thought, well, he can make use of this religious stuff. And I started to send them over to Peter, still unopened. And in August 1980, I went out to the medical room for headache tablets. And Peter was in the medical room, and I happened to say to him, I hope you're getting the magazines that I'm sending over to you. I don't know who's sending them, Peter, but you're quite welcome to them. And even before Peter could answer, the medical officer, who became a good friend, a guy called Joe Martin, the medical officer interjected, and he said, do you not think it's God who's sending you these magazines? I mean, Roger, did you ever hear anything as ridiculous in your life? God sending magazines from New Zealand to the Maze prison. And I told him that I was skeptical about God. I didn't believe God existed. And he said to me, regardless of whether I believed in God or not, didn't take away the fact that there was a God. Nor did it take away the fact that if I died in the state I was in, I was going to hell. And once I got there, I wouldn't be skeptical anymore. I would be a believer. I wasn't expecting that answer. He wrong-footed me.
Yes.
And see, yeah, see if there's a heaven and a hell, Roger, no argument. If there is a heaven and a hell, I know where I'm going. If there is a heaven and a hell, but is there a heaven and a hell? Is there a God? You know, what religion's right? So all these questions started to flood my mind. And it was only after my conversion, Roger, looking back and thinking, how on earth did I get to this position? That I realized that was a pivotal night in the medical room when Joe Martin said, regardless of whether you believe in that, doesn't take away the fact that there is a God. And those magazines, as I look back, I never received another one after that. It's as bizarre as that, Roger, but that's just how it happened. And it wasn't long after that Christmas Eve 1980.
Yes, now tell us about this, because this was the defining moment in your life.
Yeah, it was defining, and you know, you knew Gladys Blackburn. Gladys was a retired school teacher who came down to my cell that Christmas Eve night. And after a bit of formal conversation, she just simply lifted down the Bible and she started to read the story of the crucifixion from Luke 23. And she stopped at the 42nd verse where the thief said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And she said, think who this thief's calling Lord. Think about it. Here's a man with a crown of thorns pushed into his head, back lacerated with a Roman whip. They've spat upon him, they've punched him, they've beaten him, they've stripped him naked to humiliate him. And yet this thief addresses him with a divine title, calls him Lord. Does he look like a Lord to you, or the Lord to you? And see, she's explaining that, Roger, for the very first time, I come under what I can now term as conviction of sin. For the first time, I felt guilty, an overwhelming sense of guilt. Also realizing that there was no justification for my actions. Like, see, before this, I would have justified my actions and said I was perfectly justified in what I was doing. But here, see, when I came face to face with the cross of Christ, there was no justification. I was guilty. And I realized that guilt, and I felt that guilt in contrast to Jesus Christ, who I realized was sinless. You know, my life was characterized by everything repugnant and evil, but his life is characterized by everything pure. And I realized that night, Roger, this is not me looking back. This is how I was feeling that night, at that time, at that moment, that Jesus Christ was sinless. And yet on the cross, Jesus Christ, who was sinless, was taking my punishment. He was taking my place. It was as clear as that. And if Jesus Christ was taking my punishment, if he was taking my place, if he loved me so much to die for me, how do I become a Christian? How do I become a follower of this man? And I asked that woman, how do you become a Christian? And she explained it to me in very simple terms: accept, believe, and confess. And at that night, I got down on my knees in the cell and repented of my sin. I think I prayed a little prayer from the back of a little gospel tract she read me. But that prayer was prayed believingly. There was no flash of lightning, there was no claps of thunder, there was no, what term, funny mystical experience. If there was anything subjective after that, Roger, it was, I felt clean. After I prayed that prayer, I felt clean. Now, I see all the hate and all the bitterness and all the anger, all the rage, all the wrath. Roger, it went like that. It went immediately. And there was a peace and there was a contentment. And yeah, I'm born again. I'm a new person in Christ.
Now, that didn't get you out of prison, of course. You continued to serve there. What was it like? Because you know, belonging to UVF, once you go into a group like that, you're in for life.
Hmm.
Fellow prisoners would know that there's been a change. How was it in prison with the UVF people who were there?
Yeah, Roger, you don't walk away from an organization like that. They rule by fear. And if one person walks away and gets away with it, they know that 50, 60 will follow after. And so, yeah, there were threats, ostracization, and nothing, thankfully, on my part physical. Just the thought of it is enough sometimes to put you under psychological pressure. But yeah,
Mm,
it was difficult. But I continually said to them, look, I'm in another army now, and I
mm,
serve another general, and I take orders from somebody else. And you folk can do with me as you will, but I'm in God's hands now. And so it was that nailing the colours to the mast from day one and not buckling under the pressure, and trusting God. And not, although, yeah, feeling at times like a shake, knowing fear and feeling fear, but not wanting to show it openly, because I didn't want these people to think, that Christians were weak and willy livered. Nah,
mm,
Christians have backbone, and Christ gives you that backbone, and to stand up against, you know, those people. I think I felt, and others who became Christians felt, it was important to show that God is faithful to his promises. That
mm,
when God says he is with his people, he is with his people, and we have no need to be afraid.
mm.
So yeah, even though I feel it sometimes inside, not wanting to show it outwardly, Roger, in case I, you know, brought disrepute upon my Saviour's name.
Now, your mother, you know,
Hmm.
she would certainly know what happened.
Yeah.
I know that when she when your father was killed, she stopped the singing, didn't she? And then you were
Yeah.
to write to her and say that you'd become a Christian. What was her initial reaction?
Yeah. When I wrote to my mum, you're right that after my dad was killed, she stopped singing. She said she had nothing to sing about.
Mm,
6 months later, to the day after my dad was killed, my younger brother was born. He had never seen his dad.
mm,
And my mum often said she would have got involved in terrorism had she not had a little baby to look after.
mm,
But such was her hate.
mm,
But yeah, I wrote out to my mum, told her what had happened, and letters come back and forward. But yeah, one of the letters, she was saying, how could I talk about a God of love? How could I talk about a God of forgiveness? Where was God's great love and God's great forgiveness the night my dad was gunned down in the street like a dog? And she
mm,
shared with me in the letter about how she had met my dad after he came out of the army after the Second World War. Um, and how all their hopes and their dreams had been shattered because of those IRA scum, and she had underlined that 3 times.
mm.
And yeah, you could feel the hate. So you could, in fact, I just found that letter a few weeks ago, Roger, and it's in the
Really
drawer behind me here. It's
amazing.
amazing when you read it, you can still see the hate in that
Yeah.
letter.
But then
And I
you get
wrote out,
another. Sorry.
yeah, and I wrote out a letter. Must have been reading Romans 12:19.
Mm,
This is just a few weeks after I was saved, like. And Romans 12:19 says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. And explained to my mum that my problem, my family's problem, we thought vengeance belonged to us. Vengeance belongs to God. And I wrote a covering letter to my younger sister who was professing faith. I said to her, look, get my mum, get her to church with you,
mm,
which she did. And yet this letter is also in the drawer alongside that one. I said, just found them a few weeks ago when we were tidying up. And she's right, this letter comes back, and this is how she opens it. I now know what you mean about God's forgiveness. Tonight at church, I became a Christian. Oh boy, Roger, you could see a mountain move. Those two letters are as different as black as the white.
mm,
And yeah, after Christ came into her life, she started singing again. It's amazing.
mm,
He puts, Jesus Christ puts all the broken pieces. puts them all back together again.
And he
My
puts a
mum's
new
like,
song in our mouth. Yes.
yeah.
Just quickly, Billy,
Mhm.
time's running out, but do you have nightmares about what happened?
I used to have more nightmares than I do at the present, Roger.
Mm,
See, as time moves on,
mm,
maybe the heart becomes harder or whatever. I don't know. But here, Roberta, my wife, she was just saying to me we were out with friends last week, and she says, "You want to try sleeping with him? See the weird noises he makes at night? They're frightening." She said, and this is what you said, they're almost demonic, those noises.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, even though I think subconsciously a lot of that stuff haunts me, Roger.
Mm,
It comes out when I'm sleeping.
mm. Well,
Uh,
Yorkshire tea, do a sleepy time tea. You'll have to try it. But I want to ask you something else, which is a deeper question, really, because
mhm.
Billy, you're a pastor of a church now in
Yeah.
Ormskirk in Lancashire, Baptist church there, and you've had many years to reflect on things. But I think if I was to ask you, if you were to die today, do you know you'd go to heaven? I think you'd say yes. You know
Mhm.
you're going to heaven. Is that right?
That is right. On the basis of God's promises.
So it's not what you've done, it's what
No.
Jesus did. He died
Hmm.
to take away your sin, to offer you forgiveness, and you
Yes.
receive that. But Billy, the man you shot dead, we don't know what
Mm.
was going through his mind and heart in those last few moments, but you sort of imagine he's gone to hell.
Hmm.
Does that bother you?
Oh yeah, Roger. I don't. You can't take the life of another individual without, or another human being, without that impacting your thinking. And yes, how you see, at the end of the day, Roger, I can only leave those things in God's hands. God permitted that incident to happen for whatever reason. I planned it for evil, but God
Mm.
in His grace has brought some good out of it.
But it does, it seems to some, it seems very strange. A murderer can go to heaven. And the man
Mm.
murdered, though I don't think he was a very good man, but we'll leave that for the moment. But the man
Hmm.
murdered goes to hell.
Yeah.
It doesn't square up in some
No,
people's minds.
I think it's one of those things in the mysteries of God's providence. There are a lot of things that don't square up, but God, God has been in the business of saving and transforming the lives of people like me for millennia. Moses murdered,
Mm,
the great lawgiver of Israel. Moses murdered and dispatched someone to hell, dispatched an Egyptian to an eternity without God.
mm,
And yet, you know, God raises up Moses. King David murdered
mm,
Uriah.
mm,
Um, Paul, who gave us the New Testament, he was party to the first Christian martyr. He was the armchair general. He gave the orders while they stoned Stephen to death.
mm.
Although Stephen went to heaven, of course.
Yes.
But, you know, there are mysteries in God's providence that, I have to leave with God. And yes, there are things that are perplexing in relation to I'm saved, but this guy that I
Mm,
sent into eternity in an instant, for all parts and for all that we know, wasn't.
mm,
And those are things that I just have to leave with God, Roger.
mm. Looking back on your life,
Mm-hmm.
Billy, you know, you raised the issue right at the beginning. What if you'd gone as a family to
Mm-hmm.
Bangor that day instead of just going for a walk in the park and then painting the paving stones red, white, and blue? Do you ever think, oh, what if I don't know what if I hadn't had that spirit of revenge? Then life might have been so different. Do you have
Mm.
regrets like that?
Yeah, Roger. There's so many regrets, so many what ifs. I regret ever taking up, the gun before I took up the Bible.
Mm,
And if you know, it was my friend's dad who stepped out and grabbed me and told me about my dad's death. And I said, well, maybe this is God's will. What if he had been a Christian?
Huh.
And said, yes. And as a young boy of 12, sort of steered me along the steps in working that out. You know, would never have gone down the line of, you know, violence. And I think it's in the Chronicles of Narnia. I can't remember it all, but I think they're on a path and there's paths leading off, and one of the kids says, "What's down that path?" It's a what if path. And I think it's Aslan says, well, what would have been down that path is not for you to find out. This is the path you're on. And yeah, there are so many what ifs.
That's a very helpful note on which to finish. Billy, thank you very, very much. I know